Welcome to Relationship Equity, a podcast that explores how successful people cultivate meaningful connections with others in their personal and professional lives. Learn from the stories, insights, and advice of leaders, innovators, and influencers who have built strong bonds with their teams, their customers, their communities, and their families. Here's Richard Walker.
For the past 2 decades, author, analyst, entrepreneur, and sought-after keynote speaker Charlene Li has been a visionary leader helping organizations envision the future and navigate disruption. Charlene has worked with hundreds of companies ranging from Adobe to Southwest Airlines and advised half of the Fortune 100 companies. Welcome to the podcast, Charlene.
Thank you for having me.
With as talented as you are, with as much experience as you have, you've inspired thousands of people through your words, through your books, through many mediums. How do you stay humble?
Oh, it's pretty easy. I am humbled every day by how much I don't know. It's just like, how does that work? What does this do? What motivates people? I mean, there are so many questions to be answered out there. I have not even close to all the answers.
I find, and I'm sure that, and feel free to ask me questions as well, but I find the most successful people are lifelong students. Even though people like yourself that have accomplished so much, you're always looking to learn because life doesn't stand still. Business doesn't stand still. Technology doesn't stand still. And if you're not continuously learning, you're going backwards, right?
Right. I just get very curious about how things and how people work. And the more complex, the more wide and big the system is and diverse the system is, the more interesting it becomes because all these collisions happen that you don't anticipate. Like, oh, look at that. What's happening there? I love the intersection of people and business and work and technology because when you throw all those things together, some really interesting things happen.
And now when you say intersection, what do you mean by the intersection of all the facets of what you do? Because you sit right in the middle of the intersection with what you do, right? You help companies grow, you help people grow, and you sit in that intersection. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean about that, please?
Sure. Organizations are simply made up of people who agree to put their livelihoods together, their efforts together to achieve a common goal and purpose. And I always like to say that the people who run those organizations, the leaders, are engaging in building a relationship with the people who choose to follow them. And that's all leadership has been and always will be. It's just simply a relationship, people who aspire to create change and the people inspired by them to follow them and make that change happen. When you have the business and the technology helps you achieve those goals in new and different ways. And it's not the technology that does it, it's the people who do it. It's the people who are putting the technology to work.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because people, technology, process, it all has to intertwine. And let's face it, you're in the business of people, so am I, and people are fascinating. And some things are predictable with people, and some are not. And we all have profiles. How would you describe yourself? If you were, somebody wants to know who you are, how do you describe yourself?
I'm very curious. I like to have a lot of conversations with people. And the thing that drives me more than anything else is to create transformations and catalyze transformations in people. I really like to create these moments of aha, like, oh, now I get it, where you move from a point of confusion to a point of clarity, and then from there into action. So the way I do it is by being very, very curious about not just the things that happen at a global technology, big schema level, but also what's happening inside of the person that I'm sitting with and talking with. Like what's going on in their head, what's going on in their heart, and to try to understand that to figure out how we can move forward.
It's very interesting because it's hard to, especially when you are going into an organization and you're working with executives and this outsider is coming in to help them. And you know there's going to be different responses. Let's face it, some people are very open and they're very transparent and they want to be helped. And then you've got the exact opposite end of the spectrum that some people don't feel as though they need it, but it's kind of being forced on them. How do you first establish credibility for yourself and trust? We all know everything regarding relationships revolves around trust. How do you do that when you don't really know who the person is that you're working with?
I don't know much about them, but I think one of the things that I do very well is to dig deep with and go deep with people very, very quickly. I'm not a very intimidating person. I don't put up a lot of walls. And the fact that I can be very open and accepting and not have judgment about the person puts people at ease, because they can admit, I don't know how to do this, or I'm worried, and they can show that side of vulnerability, and that's where growth happens. My job is to make it as comfortable and safe for them to be uncomfortable and to hold that space for them as they go on this journey.
That's obviously a skill that you've developed and acquired over a long career. As we know, many people find themselves in leadership positions. They've done well in the career in an individual contributor role, and then they go into leadership, and then they're asked to be a coach with no real coaching with how to be a coach. So what's your best advice? Because we both have seen in our careers really good examples of coaching, and then we've seen the exact opposite. For somebody that's early in their leadership career and early in their coaching career, what advice would you give to them?
Set aside your own biases of how the world works, because what works for you may work for somebody else, but it may not. And so we enter every single conversation as when we have a potential to coach with a preconception of what is right, what is the good way to do things, best practices. And that's a good starting point, but it's not always the answer. And so the key here is to be really open, listen with an open mind and open heart to what the person is telling you. What are the problems that they see? What are their goals and ambitions? What are the challenges that they have? And then use that to piece together the advice. Use that to inform the advice that you want to give.
I think that's wonderful advice. How difficult is it for somebody that doesn't have the skills, the natural skills that you have that you've developed over the years, to develop those kind of skills that they don't come naturally to them? You're naturally a very curious person. Some people are just not. How can you coach somebody to kind of change their way of coaching? Because let's face it, as you said, it's about asking questions and asking the right questions. How do you coach somebody to do that if it doesn't come naturally to them?
Yeah, so there are two things. And I go, being a great leader is not always having the answer. Being a great leader is being able to ask the right questions to get to the answer. And people always learn much better. This is the Socratic method. People always learn much better if they come up with the answer themselves and you are guiding them to the answer and helping them see what that truth is. The other major skill I encourage people to have comes from Epictetus, who is a Stoic philosopher. And he said that you were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth and use them in the same proportion. And I think that is such great advice, because as leaders, we think we have to talk all the time. And in fact, we have all these tools now that can record our meetings and can track how much of the time you are speaking. You should be speaking as little as possible, because that means that you're listening in.
I laughed because I was told that very early in my career, and I have to tell myself that same thing every single day, because passionate people, I'm half Italian, passionate people have always got something to say, but sometimes it's better just to listen. And it's more powerful as a coach and a leader to listen and to ask the right questions. Now, to talk to me a little bit about body language, because we know that communication is not just verbal. You know, the body language and other aspects of, tonality, those kind of things. Can you talk about those things as it relates to coaching, especially, for a newer coach, and not even necessarily a newer coach, but some of them might have been coaching for a while, the importance of your body language and the importance of your tone when you're coaching somebody or when you're coaching a group?
I always like to say, if you were the person receiving this, how do you want to show up? And do you want to show up aggressively, leaning in, using big, gestures, dominating the room? Or do you want to be more quiet and still, allowing them to open up, allowing them, again, holding and giving them space to explore really difficult topics? And I find that creating psychological safety, all the techniques and tools to do that, if you turn the tables and you think proactively, what can I do? How can I show up? What are the words I will say? How will I say it? How quickly will I talk? Where will I sit? How will we be in relationship to each other? All have things to do with thinking about how do I set the setting so that we can have the right kind of conversation. Instead of sitting across from each other at a table, maybe you sit next to each other at the table.
Psychological safety, two very powerful words. What do you mean exactly by that?
Psychological safety is when you are creating the space for people to feel mentally safe, to say whatever it is on their mind, to bring their whole selves to work, to come up with an idea that may not be popular, but know that they will be heard and respected, and that they will not be punished for whatever it is, even if it's an actually like ridiculous idea that you feel safe because you think it's valid. And it promotes the sense of agency in people, that they have a voice, they have the ability to have an impact on the outcome, and that they're not just a cog in the wheel, just over there in the corner being expected to just churn out work. So when you can create that sense of agency and also of psychological safety, then people will put in all the effort because they know it will be heard, respected, accepted, and really valued.
The other thing you said, thank you for that, is you come across as not intimidating at all. And some of the mistakes that we've probably both, as well, I know that I have and you no doubt have as well, is that some people in their coaching careers, they feel they don't understand the complexity of that, of coming in lower and not coming in as I'm the one with all the answers and I'm strong and I'm powerful. I see you smiling. How do you teach somebody, or can you teach somebody, can you coach somebody to come in soft and approachable? And let's talk a little bit about self-awareness as it relates to that.
They say that the first rule of leadership is to know thyself. And it's really difficult to be an effective leader of leaders, coaching other people, for example, if you don't know, if you're not even aware and able to coach yourself. So that self-awareness, that understanding of how you are coming in and what kind of impact you're having on people. Now, this is the thing. I can be very warm and accepting and nurturing. It's partly my nature. It's partly a small, short Asian woman of undetermined age. So people don't know what to make of me.
You don't know how old you are.
No, I know how old I am, but most people really don't know how old I am. And they also can't tell what ethnicity. So I don't fit into any box. And for a while, this was a detriment because I was told by speaking coaches that I needed to present much more like a tall, old white man, that I wasn't persuasive and authoritative enough on the stage. It wasn't until I got a coach who was also a woman, a speaking coach who was a woman, who said, oh, your manner comes across very well. You're very authoritative. You're very sure of yourself. You have a great presence, but you can also be warm and encouraging and nurturing to people. And that's going to be a distinct advantage that you have, that you can do both of those things from the stage. My manner invites people to take a look on the other side, to try something that feels really risky. And I give them the confidence that no matter what the outcome is going to be, they're going to be okay. Versus another typical way of approaching it is like, you're an idiot if you don't do this. You have to do this right now because everyone is. Better hurry up and do it, or else you will be a loser. That's not a great place to come. That's not the way that I would coach somebody, but some people coach people that way.
Yeah. I love what you said there, because being your authentic self, everybody else is that Socrates guy. It was a smart fella with self-awareness. And I do a lot of coaching on self-awareness, and it's so important. We've all got a perfect mirror, don't we? View yourself through other people's eyes. The term executive presence comes out a lot. You need to work on your executive presence. So what does that mean? Well, I'll ask you that question. What does that mean to you? You no doubt are asked to coach executives or people that want to get to that level on their executive presence. What does that mean to you? And how do you coach people to have so-called executive presence?
Well, it actually is a loaded term because depending on the culture and the company that you have, it could look very, very different. If a traditional, hierarchical, very male-oriented model where most of the leaders who are successful in the organization are men, look to them and see how they show up. And they show up very differently than if it's a different group that's much more mixed, much more diverse. And I know some groups that are, again, lots of men in them, but they show up very differently because the culture is just very different. So really look to how other executives inside the company show up. And what does that mean to have an executive or leadership presence? For some, it's speaking clearly with compassion and passion about the things that they want to accomplish, saying this is the way we're going to get there, being very sure about themselves and confident, but with a strong tinge of humility too as well, to say they'll be the first ones to admit that they were wrong. And that gives people the level of trust that, oh, this person really wants to do things, but they're not going to always have the right answer. And they are encouraging us to speak up so that we can take the best path forward. So what does executive presence mean? I go back to what are the other people in your group, in your community, in that company? How do they perceive and reward executive presence?
Confidence, compassion, passion. Let me tell you a little story. I was blown away. Our daughter, our eldest daughter, just got married on the island where we live in North Captiva. And we had 175 people on the island. How my wife pulled it off, I'll never know. But she did, got everybody. And I was asked to do a little speech, and of course I did. And my daughter, youngest daughter, went after me. Now, my youngest daughter is 23 years old. She's very much an introvert, and she does not like speaking in front of a crowd. And she blew everybody away. I mean, blew them away because of, it was not because of the words, but it was because of how she presents. She talked quietly, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They think they have to talk loudly and jump around on a stage or in front of a whiteboard. Confidence and you being your authentic self. And my Allison, she was incredible because she talked quietly, but everybody was hanging on her every word because of her passion and compassion, and the delivery of her message was quiet. It wasn't loud, but everybody heard every single word because she was her authentic self, and it was fantastic. And I think if more people, I think too many people believe they've got to be somebody else. If you're a quieter type of person, you can actually command. One of the things I've learned is if you're talking with people and if you get really quiet, people lean in. They lean in and they want to listen to what you have to say. And so there's little, we don't want to call them tricks, but techniques like that can help you have this. So I hate the term executive presence. But if your role is to command an audience and to get a message across, it's important. And practice, right? It's like anything else. You practice.
If I follow somebody who's just been very loud, who has a very different style from me, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just stand in front of the crowd and pause and look around. Because there's power in holding silence and holding the space for the silence. Because most people feel very uncomfortable with it. And so being able to just be there, hold it, wait, let the audience soak you in, let you then soak you absorb with who they are. Take a deep breath and then begin. It can be incredibly powerful because you're establishing your presence. Literally, your presence is there and they cannot ignore because you're standing on the stage or in front of a group, completely silent and still. And then you begin.
You've talked to many, many groups of people. Can you give an example of when you walked off the stage and you felt that was fantastic and you felt as though, well, before you answer that, obviously you have a purpose of being on a stage. You've been asked to talk to people and you want to walk off feeling as though you've made an impact. Can you give me an example of a situation, a time that you had where you got off and you went, yeah, I nailed that, and why? I know you're a very humble person, Charlene, but I want you to just, and the reason I ask you that is because people will learn from it. What did you do that was so impactful?
When I am on stage, I try to connect with people very personally. If I am in front of a group of executives, or even just with one executive that I'm coaching, I want to connect personally. And it is about making myself vulnerable to talk about the challenges, how difficult this is, that I'm sitting with them, right there with them, in the middle of this messy space. And they can feel, and I can understand, they feel like I can understand their pain. And when they feel understood and heard, and I've articulated that, then they will listen to what advice and best practices I have. And that's where the aha moment comes from, is when they actually start believing in what I have to say, even though it's very difficult to hear. So one of my favorite moments was I was talking to an executive team, and they had to go through a culture transformation. And a lot of it was they just were nice to each other on the surface, but they would talk about each other behind their backs. And I interviewed most of them, and I called them on it. I called them on the fact that the trust was a major issue for the leadership team. And they were like, no, we trust each other. I'm like, you do to some extent, but not to the extent you need to if you want to make this transformation happen. Let's just let it sit.
Let's talk about culture for a second. That's so powerful. The biggest reason why people stay at the companies is typically because of the culture. The biggest reason why people leave is because of the culture. What does a company culture mean to you? No doubt a lot of your work is in helping companies improve the culture. So can you talk to me about your view of culture in general, and then what you do with companies that helps them change their culture in ways that they want it to?
Yeah, I've specialized in building disruptive, fast-moving, innovative cultures. And who doesn't want that, right? So I believe that culture is simply made up of two things. It's your beliefs and your behaviors. So if you want to change your culture, then you have to look at the underlying beliefs that drive your behaviors, or look at the behaviors that you've picked up along the way that have shaped your beliefs. So I worked with an organization that systematically changed their culture in 6 months. And this is a very, very large organization. Yeah, we wrote a culture manifesto to say, this is what we believe. We believe these things, and they're exemplified by these behaviors. And they broke them up into 3 groups. And then each leader could pick one belief, one behavior that they were personally going to take on. So there were so many beliefs, but they all knew their teams, and this is a global company. They all said, this is what I know I need to work on, that my team needs. And they all had little different things that they wanted to work on. And that was the work plan. And they were like, this is the work plan? I'm like, this is the work plan. The culture is going to change because you're going to identify these old beliefs that no longer hold you back, and the behaviors. And anytime that shows up, you're going to say, no, we don't do those things anymore. We don't believe these things. We don't say these things. We don't feel these things. Instead, we have these new beliefs that are going to move us forward. We're going to do these things, believe this way, act this way, feel this way instead. And they all pick one.
That would strongly imply then that people can change in general. I'll stop there. They can change, and they can change the beliefs, and they can change the behaviors. Is that something you would agree with?
Absolutely. I mean, this is not a hard exercise. I encourage any team leader to do this. Sit down with your team and literally have, if you're doing this in person, have some sticky notes and write on the pads just whatever a belief is that you think holds us back as a team, as an organization, even as individuals, and throw them into the middle. And just mess them all up, and you can see that there are some common beliefs in here that people don't want to believe anymore. We want to let go of this. A common one is, I don't have permission. Well, do you? Do you not? Let's challenge that. Let's think about that. Do you have permission? Yes, but how does that permission look like? You do have permission to do these things, which is, I don't have permission, nonstop. No, just a stop, full stop. No, we do have permission. Let's define that. What does that look like? And anytime it comes up that you think you don't have permission, check that list, flip it, and say, I do have permission to do these following things. And I'm going to change my behavior because of that. Another one is, I don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have budget. Failure is going to be punished. I mean, these are common beliefs that hold people back, and you can decide that you're not going to believe them anymore. But you have to actively make a choice. of not believing something and believing something else, and start acting that way.
You have to make a choice, right? That's what you said. It's up to you to make a choice with how you respond to any given situation and what you believe in. And in my not so humble opinion, if your own beliefs don't match up with a company's beliefs, you're probably in the wrong company.
Or what happens is you find other people who share similar beliefs and you start building momentum and you change the beliefs of the company. So the problem, I think, in most companies is that cultures just happen. They, by default, occur. And versus being intentionally set and directed to say, we want this type of culture, not that culture. We want to act this way, not that way. And then putting time and effort into consistently making sure people behave in the way that we want to and not in the way we don't want to. Oftentimes, cultures just happen. And if you want to be intentional about the culture, then you have to pay attention to it and intend to make sure it goes in a certain direction versus not.
Company's vision, mission, core value statements. As you go into these organizations, for example, we just had a town hall today. We always, every bigger meeting and sub-meetings that I'm not involved with, we always talk about what they are. They're not just words on the wall. And it's interesting because our vision statement is to provide innovative, disruptive, and impactful solutions to our clients. I want to talk more about that with you because that's what you do, basically. You go into companies and help them do that. So I'm really intrigued to know how you take a company from not being that way to being innovative and disruptive and creating impactful solutions. Well, let's talk about that, because if you go into a big global company, they're kind of slow and then they're behind, and they say to you, Charlene, come and help us disrupt. We want to be disruptive. We want this brand new thing, digital transformation. You might not have heard of it, Charlene. It's a brand new thing, digital transformation and AI. We want that as well. That sounds like a fun thing to do. Everybody's doing that. So come in and help us transform. And they bring you in. Okay, changes overnight. Off you go. Where do you start? I'm obviously being facetious.
Yeah, I start with, who is your future customer? I always start with that. Why do you want to do this? Is it because it's there? It's the worst reason. Because your competition is doing it? Well, what if they weren't doing it? Would you do it still? Yet, and the best way to think about this is an external force, but it's your customer. And the reality is your current customer today, the one that you serve extremely well, the one that loves you to bits and pieces, and you love them back, you love serving them, will not be here in the future. They are changing and evolving. And there are new customers who are coming up, and you need to figure out what these customer needs are, and then how to serve them. And you need to start making those changes and plans today, dedicated resources to that, to be able to go for that future. It doesn't mean ignore your current customers, serve them really well, but be constantly looking for your future customers. And the further out into the future you can look, the more disruptive you will be.
Now, what about those people that, I'm good. I don't need to change. I'm good. I'm happy with my job, and there's this new train that's going over there, but I'm going to stay on this one I'm on. How do you coach those people to, for want of a better term, see the light? See that if they don't get on this new train, probably going to get left behind. How do you work with those people?
Well, you tell them they're going to be left behind. I know one company that recently said to all their employees, I'm going to give you $200 every month that you can use with any AI tool. Before you get that, you have to get trained on how to be responsible and ethical in your use of AI. Then I'm going to let you loose. You have to stay within the certain bounds of our governance and AI data use policies and data governance. You have to stay safe. You have to stay inside these guidelines. But anytime in there, go for it. And if you're using these actively, like on a daily basis, to actively change the way you're working, you get a green light. If you're still trying to figure out, how it's working, but you're trying, and maybe it's not so important to your job, you're yellow. But if you're not even trying to learn, you're going to be a red light. And in 6 months, we'll have no more red lights in this company. There will be no place for you here. It's basically saying, we are going to be AI first. We are transforming our company, and you need to come along on this ride, or you need to find another job.
Straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Pretty straightforward. And that's one company's approach. Other companies may say, we're going to have some segment of people going after this new stuff. And if you're not comfortable with the new stuff, fine. We need some people to stay behind and work on the current customers. But realize once those current customers are no longer our customers, you may be out of a job.
Right. Transparency, honesty, it's everything. Okay, Charlene, I want to get into some of the books you've written, but unfortunately, we have to stop here. Next time on Relationship Equity, transformational leadership and strategy expert Charlene Li shares some advice for building relationships.
I always tell people that the one book you have to read is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And just go back and reread that over and over and over again. And the fundamental first thing you have to do is be genuinely curious about the other person.
This has been Relationship Equity. If you want to take your career, your business, or your personal relationships to the next level, reach out to Richard at yorksolutions.net. You can also get Richard's book, Relationship Equity, your cornerstone investment to great gains in business and life, on Amazon now. Relationship Equity with Richard Walker is a production of Forbes Books.